Hi everybody, welcome to our channel. If you've been here before, welcome back. If you're stopping through, glad to have you if this is your first time. When we started this channel, our intention was to talk about our immigration process in real time. Unfortunately, we're 5.5 years in and life happened and we never documented our immigration process like we intended to. So, you met somebody in another country and you want to get married. Now what? What happens now? I don't know the answer for every country, but I would imagine that the process is similar in other countries as well. We did not get married in the United States, and when we decided to get married, it became a process of figuring out what documents would be necessary and what processes we needed to complete inside his country. So my husband is from Turkey. We've talked about this in our very first video. And of course, I'm from the United States. And when we decided to get married, I'm going to be honest, I never had a clue what would be involved with getting married to somebody in another country. And I just want to tell you that it is not for the faint of heart. You shouldn't do it if you're not serious about it, because there are a lot of steps involved. There are a lot of processes involved. But if you want to do it, hopefully our videos can help you through the process. We're always available to answer questions. We did complete our process actually, and my husband did get his US citizenship. So from start to finish, it took us about 5.5 years to get that done, and many dollars later. The thing that I was thinking about is, when I was a little girl, I always had this idea that I would go to another country and meet a man and get married. How many times do we think something like that when we're little girls? I can tell you that it happens because we watch these romantic movies and we think that we're just going to marry our Prince Charming one day. Nobody tells you everything that you have to do if you want to marry a man not from the United States. So I've been married before and divorced, and some of the things that I needed in order to get married to my husband in his country was not only copies of my marriage and divorces, but copies that were notarized, official copies. It couldn't be a photocopy of those documents. Additionally, I needed my birth certificate within 6 months. It had to be newly requested and official. Every document that you take to another country, especially in my case in Turkey, had to be translated from English to Turkish. That included my birth certificate, the marriages, the divorces. Any documents that they ask for in another country are not just being given in your own language, but they are being given in that language as well. So there are fees associated with bringing those documents. A lot of times it's not very costly to get your birth certificate or, copies of your legal paperwork that they're asking you for, but it can get kind of costly to get translation of those documents. So I would say to look into all those costs when you're thinking about doing marriage. When I told my family that I was going to, and my friends, that I was going to get married to a man in another country, that's when I learned about the show 90 Day Fiancé. Let me tell you, it was nothing like that. We didn't do a K visa. We didn't do any of that process. I went to his country and we got married in his country. But you can't just go to another country and get married to somebody, even with all those documents. I had to go into Turkey, into the US consulate, and get permission to get married to the man that I decided to marry. And it was eye-opening, and it was a little bit scary because I'm going to be honest, I had preferential treatment going into a US consulate as a US citizen. And I saw other people sitting in the consulate for their appointments, waiting a lot longer than I had to wait. And that's the unfortunate truth. But when I went before the official, they asked me, are you sure you want to get married? Do you understand what you're doing? And it was like a really heavy, serious conversation, making sure that I understood I was marrying someone in this country. And of course, I wouldn't come to the US consulate and ask for these documents and this permission. But then it doesn't stop there, because then you need to go to Turkish government officials, and they need this consular paperwork as well as your passport, your birth certificate. They need a lot of documents. And then in order for us to get married, the marriage certificate in Turkey is a marriage book. And we had to have a certain specification of photos that were given to be placed in our marriage book. It was a really interesting process. And to top it all off, when I met my husband, he was very open with the fact that he did not speak English. And of course, I didn't know any Turkish. I think the only Turkish I had ever heard was Tarkan. And that was years before I met my husband. You know, thinking about it now, it probably set the framework for me to be accepting of it. Tarkan. But my husband said, I don't speak English, and a lot of our communication was through Google Translate. Even into the year that we first lived together, the first 2 years of our marriage, there was a lot of times we were using Google Translate. I have to hand it to my husband. He didn't speak a lick of English except for hello, goodbye, and I love you, essentially, when I met him. And he speaks it very well now. So we were using Translate to do these documents, to talk about how we felt, to get to know each other. It was a process. It's not easy to go into another country and do a marriage with someone. I think I got a taste of how somebody might feel coming into our country and not understanding our language by being in Turkey and not speaking Turkish. Because generally speaking, people in Turkey, in local places, do not speak English. And I remember sitting in a lot of rooms hearing Turkish and not knowing what was being said. And to be quite honest, it was a little frightening for me. And maybe I needed to have that experience so that I would understand how my husband was going to feel when he came to this country and left his country permanently. The thing I would say is, don't go into an immigration situation if you're not serious about being in a relationship and prepared to do the work that it takes for someone to become a U.S. citizen. There are miscommunications sometimes when you don't speak the same language. Sometimes there are cultural barriers because you were raised in different cultures, and it can cause misunderstandings. You really have to want to get through this process together. So when I got married to my husband, we did it legally in Turkey after we got permission from the U.S. consulate and from Turkey for us to get married. When we got married, I had researched a little bit about his culture, but I was not fully prepared for the experience. I would say if you're going to marry somebody in another country, that you should absolutely know what their cultures and customs are. Everybody was very kind and welcoming and patient with me throughout the process. I had no idea. I had no idea what to expect. And, you know, in the USA, when we get married, we're in a church. We are in front of our friends and family. But in Turkey, when we got married, we were sitting at a table looking out at everybody. And, you know, there was two witnesses just like in the USA. And my husband was really sweet to me the day that we got married. And I was so shocked at the process. I wasn't prepared for it. So again, I would say if you're going to marry someone from another country, research their customs and their culture, and don't be surprised on your wedding day. So when I got to Turkey, I was flying from Chicago to Istanbul, and it is like a 12-hour flight one way. Thankfully, this man handled all the ticket transactions for me through Turkish Airlines. And I would say if you're ever going to Turkey, fly on Turkish Airlines. It's a great experience, even in coach, which is what I flew. When I got to Turkey, I had been on a flight for 12 hours and my husband was waiting for me and I ran right past him. I ran right past him because I was sitting by the window seat. He was so wonderful. He got me a window seat and I was shy and I did not ask anyone to move so that I could get up and find a restroom. So when I did get off of that plane after eating all of that delicious Turkish food and drinking tea and drinking coffee, I needed to find a bathroom before I could say hello to the husband that I was meeting for the first time. We had talked on, we were using Facebook Messenger to talk to each other. We met our families via video chat, via Google Translate. We would spend hours talking through video chat, doing day-to-day stuff, just, normal day stuff at home. If we were at home, we just had the video open doing our thing. If I was doing the dishes, we were video chatting. If I was cooking, we were video chatting. If he was at home doing cooking or dishes or hanging out with his daughter, we were video chatting. But my first time meeting him face to face was in Turkey, in Istanbul at the airport. Now, when I met him, it was prior to COVID. So I'm really thankful for that, because also when you're going to another country, you should learn about the airport that you're going to, learn about getting a phone card, learn about how to connect to their Wi-Fi. You should do some research before you go to another country. Thankfully, my husband thinks of everything. He is very organized. He plans everything and he knows everything about everything. Like if he's going to do something, he learns the whole thing. And so I didn't have to figure any of that out. He was waiting there for me behind the line when I got out. And I did indeed run past him first, but once we met, we went to an Airbnb where he officially proposed to me. Even though we had already entered into an agreement to get married, he officially proposed to me on one knee in a very romantic gesture and cooked me a very beautiful dinner. So that first night that we met for the first time, we did get to meet each other alone, and then I went and stayed with his family. One thing I love about Turkey is the hospitality and the sense of family and the culture that's there. I will tell you, when you decide to marry someone from another culture and from another country, be prepared for questions from the people around you and be prepared for misconceptions. There were a lot of misconceptions about my husband and his people, from people in my country who were not truly familiar with Turkey. You see things in the news and sometimes you have a tendency to associate everybody in a group together. But I will tell you that my husband's family, I had already met them and I really wasn't scared of going to Turkey to stay with them. I felt like they were good people. And that's been true throughout my marriage to my husband. So I would say be prepared for questions. People are going to ask you questions. Immigration's going to ask you questions. So it's really important to get to know about your spouse's country of origin, and to dispel those myths, if not just for your friends and family, but also for yourself, that you enter into a relationship with somebody prepared for what's going to happen. You know, Turkey is a Muslim country, and I asked my husband if I would be expected to cover my head, because that is some of the things that people were saying to me. And in Turkey, you're not required to cover your head unless you're going into a mosque. So I did have a lot of questions for him, and I think it's important when you're getting to know somebody and deciding if you can join your lives to find out if you can align with their culture and their beliefs, and get to know as much as you can about them. But I would say, even if you're not going to get married in Turkey, that you should take a trip to Turkey at least once in your lifetime. Because during our wedding proceedings and after we got married, you know, I only spent 2 weeks in Turkey prior to going back home. But I got to see Turkey, and I got to really meet my husband and his family and see how the culture and the people were. And it was one of the best experiences. I have absolutely no regrets about my choice. When he asked me to marry him, I was already in my 40s, and I had already been married and divorced. So I think that we had a different experience together because we had both been married and divorced, compared to somebody who's younger and maybe going through a longer engagement. But I feel like he was very patient with me in trying to help me understand what I needed to do. So when when we were going to all of these places together, in Turkey, there is a lot of security. You know, I was shocked. We would go places. Just so you know, if you're an American citizen, it costs more for you to do something in another country than it costs for the citizen, which is, it's true and it's right. They should get the discount because they live there. But on top of everything costing more for me to participate in, I had my purse beneath my coat. It was cold when I went to Turkey, and the guard with the gun asked me to open my coat and take it off. I will tell you, that was frightening for me. I had never had somebody search me before, and I asked my husband, why are they asking me to take my coat off? And he said, you know, this is normal. This is what happens. Your coat, I had my purse under my coat and I looked suspicious and I wasn't speaking their language. So for me to enter into Galata Tower, I had to take my coat off and get searched. And when you're going into the malls or anywhere public, you're gonna go through security, and they're gonna x-ray your purse, and it's just gonna be like going through the airport, except you don't take your shoes off. But walking around Turkey, every building we entered had security. So that's another thing that I wasn't prepared for. Also, the day of my wedding, we had to alter my dress. You know, in the USA, we do not have tailor shops that are going to alter your dress on the day of your wedding. Oddly enough, I'm telling you, it was cold in Turkey when I went there, but it was a beautiful sunshiny day, the day that I got married. And we went to this tailor shop. They altered my dress because I was a little too short for my dress, even with heels. And then I went to a beauty shop where I got my nails done, my hair was done. They put fake eyelashes on me. I don't think I've ever had that kind of treatment in my life, but the salons in Turkey are something else. You should go. Even if you're not there to meet your future husband, go to a salon in Turkey. And if you're a guy, definitely get the barber experience, because I'm telling you, those people in Turkey are getting pampered in the salon. But on my wedding day, my husband left me without internet, without anybody speaking English, and everyone was so kind to me and sweet to me, but I had to use the bathroom, okay? And my nails were wet, and I was in the process of getting my hair done, and of course, I always have to go to the bathroom somewhere. Let me just tell you, you also need to be prepared for what you might find in a bathroom in another country. So I was kind of prepared for the whole idea of having bidets. But in Turkey, there is an old-fashioned toilet that's in the floor.
Not every toilet.
Not every toilet. He's right. It's not every toilet. But I'm just telling you, I had never seen a squatty toilet.
You are not lucky.
And in this beauty salon, it was an older building, and it did not have a normal toilet. And I made a lot of people laugh when I described my experience. Another thing that endeared my husband's family to me was that they have great senses of humor. We can all laugh together. So be prepared. Just be prepared. Also, when you go to a public restroom in some other countries, you pay. You pay to go to the restroom. And I think I'm glad I experienced all those fun things in the midst of all the serious things, because those government offices and the consulate, all of that stuff is very serious. And they expect you to have what you need to have. So I learned that I knew nothing about getting married to somebody in another country. So I would say, first things first, if you decide you want to get married to someone in another country and not in your country, and you don't do the whole 90-day fiance and K visa and all that stuff that you see on TV, if you get married in another country, you need to have all of your documents on the plane with you when you go, because I couldn't come back 12-hour flight and get all that stuff. It had to be the original documents. So if you want to marry somebody, look into what documents do I need? How old do those documents have to be? Because like I said, my documents had to be stamped with a 6-month date for their certification to be accepted in the consulate and in the country. So you also need to have a translation for those documents in the language of the country that you're getting married in. And if you have a husband like mine, you know, he's got all this stuff prepared and planned out. But I would say make sure that you have your appointments in place, know where you're going, know how to get transportation to those places. In Turkey, there's public transportation, and it's pretty reasonable, and you can get a public transportation card. Thankfully, my husband rented a car, and we did not have to use public transportation to get to all of those appointments. But we did have to go to Istanbul very early in the morning to get to the U.S. consulate. And it was several days of running around to get all of these things in order. And there was even a point where we thought we were not going to be able to get married because there was a document that still had to be corrected. So I would say know every document, get every translation, and be prepared for the unexpected. And if you want to get married in another country, be prepared for the next steps of USCIS. And that's what I'm going to talk about in my next visit, because that's really why you're all here. You want to know about USCIS, right? So I'm going to tell you about that next.